Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I do agree with one thing that the member for Radisson says. He has been wonderfully honest and forthright when it comes to revealing what was actually happening with those 19 bills. He deserves some credit for that, for actually revealing the truth that the bills that this government tried to pass or introduce last November were actually not ready at all, that they were just basically no better than folders full of shredded newspaper. Um, Look, we can say immediately, I have no hesitation in saying we don't think that hydro should be privatized. When I ran for the leader of the Manitoba Liberal Party, one of the main things that I said was that there would be no privatizations. The member from McPhillips is completely right when he says the NDP privatized and sold off the land titles to a union pension fund in Ontario. The member for St. John's is absolutely correct when she says that MTS was sold off and that PC supporters and donors and members benefited and made millions and millions of dollars from it, even as MTS paid no income taxes whatsoever for years. The fact is that there are also other things we could be talking about. We could be talking about vaccinations, homelessness. We could be talking about the economy or unemployment or education. But it's worth going over the history of this a little bit, because in 2003, the NDP Premier Gary Dewar was also very angry and upset with the Public Utilities Board because they had just lowered rates for hydro. So he said this isn't proper or acceptable. They had actually lowered rates. So the then NDP Premier told the media that he needed to see a change. He wanted to overrule the PUB. And that's no different than what the PCs are doing right now. They're going to gut the PUB. They're going to strip it of its ability to do serious oversight, not just of hydro, but all sorts of other utilities. And the fact is the PUB exists not just to protect Manitobans from price hikes from hydro, MPI, or anyone else. It exists to protect Manitobans from their own government. That's what the PUB is for. The NDP tried to undermine it back in the 2000s, and the PCs are now trying to gut it in a way that's completely unacceptable. The fact is, it was also known in 2007 that the entire Wasquatam Dam did not have to be built because that equal amount of power could be generated through efficiency. That was known in 2007. I worked on the 2007 election. And as soon as that election happened, Premier Gary Dewar announced that the electorate had decided, because it was part of the NDP platform, that they were going to move the bipole transmission line. There is no question that bipole transmission line had to be built. That was a result of that was the finding of the Boston Consulting Group. It was a finding of Brad Wall. Brad Wall said this needed to be built back in 1975. If it wasn't built, we were at risk of facing a $20 billion loss to our economy if there were a serious storm and people without power for months. That is completely unacceptable. The idea that somehow this was unnecessary, that the bipole line was unnecessary, is ridiculous and reckless. The fact is, it needed to be built. The question is whether it needed to be built where it was. And there is no question whatsoever that the NDP government of the day did not want to deal with the First Nations on the east side of Lake Winnipeg. So they decided to spend an extra $1 billion to route it somewhere else. And when we talk about price hikes and rate hikes, it's this government completely steamrolled the PUB by putting price hikes in the budget that every PC member voted for. So we can't talk about that is brazen political interference in a crown corporation. It's brazen. And the only thing about it is that it is so brazen and unacceptable, that it is so brazen people can't actually believe that, well, if it's so brazen and out in the open, they can't believe there's anything wrong with it. The fact is, it is not just a question of cost overruns on dams, that both parties, the NDP and the BC in government, have been plundering hydro by hundreds of millions of dollars for years. The reason hydro's debt is so high is because these governments have both been taking out absolutely colossal amounts of money in a debt guarantee fee, water rentals, and a capital tax. They have an incentive to overbuild and an incentive to force hydro to borrow, because the more hydro gets into trouble, the better it is for the books of these two parties. The debt guarantee fee in 2009 was $74 million. Now it's $207 million. The water rentals in 2009 were $123 million. Now it's $126. The capital tax was 64 million, now it's 112. But the interest on the debt at Hydro in 2009 was $471 million. Now it's $861 million a year. When you add it all up, Hydro is paying $1.3 billion of its $2.6 billion in revenue. More than half of its revenue is going to the Manitoba government and to interest, because both parties have been willing to load Hydro with debt to the point that it risks going under. That is why Sandy Riley and the rest of the Hydro board resigned. When Sandy Riley said we need increases of 7.5%, it is because the Premier would not meet with him. The Premier would not address the fundamental issue that Hydro does not have enough capital because both governments have been running up its debt. And it wasn't just a question of privatization, it's a question of whether Hydro continues to exist or not. It's an existential question. And I'm quoting Sandy Riley on that. The risk for Hydro is not that it's privatized because no one wants to buy it. The risk is that it will take us all down because it is a $2.6 billion corporation with more debt than the entire province. And the PUB on May 1st, 2018 said, put some of that money back. We don't have to privatize. We don't have to have higher rates. We don't have to do the things that this PC government wants to do. We need to reinvest in Hydro, and all of this can be presented. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.